6th Guards Tank Brigade was part of the Guards Armoured Division. Just like other brigades, besides the frontline units, they had their support troops such as signallers, supply, and recovery and repair. Recovery and repair was the responsibility of the Brigade's Workshop of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, or the REME for short. The brigade was equipped with Churchill tanks, and its workshop was located in a tactical setting in the woods at Carlton Hall near Worksop. They had recently received a visit in January 1944 from Brigadier Tony Howard-Jones, the Deputy Director of the Electrical and Mechanical Engineering of the Second Army. He was not impressed with what he found. He sacked their CO and the second in command, and replaced them with Major Yarker and Captain Cliff Goff, who became the 2IC and the workshop officer. Having previously been recovery officer of the 22nd Armoured Brigade workshop, Captain Goff found that the men were running a very leisurely working week, with production from 08:30 to 16:30 Monday to Thursday, and knocking off for the weekend at 13:30 on a Friday. The workshop record showed weekly repairs of 12 to 15 tanks, but there had been no evidence that any of the tanks had been there. It turned out that they had been sending all their spares to the light aid detachments of the tank battalions and logging the work as done by themselves, when, in reality, they were only fixing wheeled vehicles. It also transpired that only 3 men in the workshop had ever worked on Churchills, and that was at other units. The workshop artificer sergeant major, or ASM for short, was sacked. Their weekend passes were revoked, and longer working days ensued. An arrangement was made through 8 Corps for the Churchill Tank Training Centre at Vauxhall Motors Plant in Luton to shut for 2 weeks to train the workshop's mechanical personnel. Back in Worksop, training commenced for the recovery mechanics and drivers in fieldcraft and day and night convoy drills. The upscaling work for the men, who at that point had enjoyed a relaxing life, began to cause resentment. Letters were censored before delivery, and the feelings were evidenced by a letter from one man to his father asking if he could speak to his uncle, who was a Member of Parliament. Once this was discovered, that man was told he would be posted out. Supported by the new ASM, Warrant Officer Class 1 Hum, Captain Goff improved morale and the standard of the men's training. In April 1944, the brigade relocated to Kent, but it was under a cloud of uncertainty to its future. Field Marshal Montgomery wanted to disband it and use its members as reinforcements for the Guards infantry. He was overruled by the Prime Minister, but then he refused to include the brigade in the initial invasion on D-Day and took their new Mark VI Churchills off them to give them to other tank brigades. It was then decided that the 6th Armoured Brigade would be used in the follow-up to Normandy, so 168 older model Churchills were modified to bring them up to date. This involved replacing the 6-pounder gun with a 75mm, the fitting of infantry telephones, replacement of the splined spigot on the final drive, and a 1-inch weld around the glacis plate. The welding especially took time, and even working from first to last light, a welder could only get through 1.5 tanks in a day. In Kent, the workshop was located in and around Newland Stud Farm on Charing Heath. B Vehicle Section, who repaired wheeled and soft-skinned vehicles, along with the general trades such as armourers, welders, blacksmiths, were located in a large flat roofed riding school. The tank, or A Vehicle Repair Section, the recovery mechanics, and the Royal Army Ordnance Corps store section were in the open surrounding areas. Nissan huts were erected in the orchard for the men, with the warrant officers and sergeants in a farmhouse and the officers in a nearby cottage. The whole area was surrounded by old sandpits, which were stacked with fuel. On the 13th of June 1944, the first V-1 flying bomb attacks on London began, and the workshop found that they were directly under the flight path. The Royal Air Force and United States Army Air Force did their best to shoot them down, but with flights of 3 every 10 to 15 minutes day and night, it wasn't always possible. One skimmed the roof of the riding school and landed in the sandpit, igniting the fuel. The shrapnel from the anti-aircraft guns and stray rounds from the fighters also didn't help, and one Bofors anti-aircraft gun crew were killed by an American fighter. On the 23rd of June, all modifications were complete, and the brigade was ordered to move to Portsmouth on Monday the 26th of June to embark for Normandy. On Saturday the 24th, Captain Goff was sitting in his office, when the man who'd asked his father to speak to his MP uncle came in. He apologised for his behaviour and realised that the state the workshop was in would have made it unfit to deploy. He asked if his posting could be cancelled, which Captain Goff promised to try and arrange the next day. On Saturday the 24th of June, just after 0600, disaster struck. The RAF shot down a V-1, which ricocheted off the riding school roof and landed amongst the Nissan huts, occupied mainly by the workshop and HQ sections. The recovery section and the Royal Army Ordnance Corps stores were missed. 46 men were killed outright by the explosion, and 80 were injured, 40 of which were serious. with 6 of those dying shortly afterwards. Because of security, an active service burial in a mass grave in the nearby village of Lenham was arranged. Squads of guardsmen from the 3 battalions of the brigade worked right through the Saturday digging the grave, and by light of lamps that night, the remainder of the workshop laid their comrades to rest. Each man was wrapped in his blanket with his number, rank, and name attached on the label. Captain Goff and ASM Hum were in the grave, marking the place of each man. A plan was sealed in a bottle and placed under a wooden cross after the grave had been filled in. On the Sunday, after all denominational services were held, one of the men, Craftsman Lazarus, who was the letter writer, was Jewish. He had a separate Jewish service and lies today with the Star of David on his headstone. The total casualties were well over 100, and they were nearly all tradesmen. 6 Armoured Brigade Workshop REME, instead of deploying with a highly trained and efficient workshop, landed in Normandy on the 20th of July with 130 reinforcements taken from various units along the south coast. They did, however, manage to deal with the heavy tank casualties that 6th Armoured Brigade suffered in Operation Bluecoat, a breakout battle on the 30th of July, just 10 days after landing. ASM Hum lent his leadership and professional skill into helping Captain Goff and Major Yarka into creating an excellent team that continued to serve right through the Northwest European campaign. Virtually every year, starting in 1945, the REME hold a memorial service in the cemetery at Lenham, where the men still lie in their communal grave. Individual gravestones were erected over the grave. On the 29th of November 1964, a set of gates were dedicated to the men with a plaque on each post. This episode would not have been possible without the help of the REME Museum, who allowed my dad access to the archives. The museum is now located in the former RAF Lenham Officers' Mess, which is now MOD Lenham, where the REME undertake their trade training, and I can't recommend a visit enough. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Cheery bye.